Hey everybody, welcome to the crew. Dawn Zoldai here. I'm your co-host.
And I'm Mike Peel, the other co host of the Full Crew.
Welcome back, and this is your weekly newscast. We are so excited today to have with us these two complete pros, Danielle Gagne and Randall Warnas. So welcome to the crew.
Thank
Great
you.
to be here.
Absolutely. We're going to kick it off today with Danielle. She picked out a really cool article. By the way, everybody, I'm live in Houston, Texas at the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit, and I'm in my hotel room, as you can see. Volatus is going to have a huge presence here. And Danielle's article is relevant to a lot of the content that's going to be shown today. So if we can show that article, Mike, that would be awesome.
Well, actually, before we dive into that, if you can like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the notification bell, that really helps us out. And yeah, we're going to check out this awesome article that Danielle got. So Skyports and cargo drone delivery infrastructure deal with Singapore Jurong port. So what did you think was interesting about this? I mean, you're a drone pro, so clearly there's something to this story.
Well, first off, it's great to be here, and thank you, Don and Mike, for having me. So Skyports is doing something really unique, and I think it's not necessarily the story itself, but the idea of drones and cargo that I thought is very interesting, and just starting to see that get moving forward, especially this ship to shore, which is what they're working with, and Singapore always leading the way in a lot of this technology. And along with South Korea, Japan, they're all looking at this technology because it makes sense. You know, the South Pacific is a lot of island communities. There's a lot of cargo moving. And so getting that cargo, small deliveries from the shore to the ships in a more ecological fashion, a more environmentally friendly fashion, and also cost-effective fashion is really becoming an issue. So that's kind of why I brought this article to bear. I think it's a really important and growing use case that we're not talking a lot about. And I'm wondering what everyone else is thinking about cargo deliveries in general.
Well,
Well,
I was going to go ahead, Mike, you go.
yeah, I mean, I've constantly spoken over the years with Mike Blades about like the concept of the middle mile actually being like the first place you'll see delivery drones. Um, and ship to shore makes sense, right? That's I wouldn't exactly qualify that as middle mile, but somewhere in between middle mile and last mile, right? And my question is scale. Like, so is this like something that can be used to alleviate stress on the ports if things bottleneck? Because like when I think about shipping containers and what's on these big freighters, that's pretty big stuff that I'm not exactly expecting a drone to manage. So this probably has like a very, very specific targeted use case for very specific cargo. Any insights into that?
Well, yes. So a lot of what happens is that these ships are in port, and maybe they need certain parts, emergency parts, or they're just stopping by the ship, and they need medical deliveries, or they need personal deliveries, or they need specific things. So this isn't like bringing a big cargo container and putting it on the ship, although that is definitely something that larger drone companies are thinking about, like how can we transport cargo in the air via drone to other locations. And you see that with the Nautilus, which is something that Volatus Aerospace is very excited about in the future in 2025. But right now, I think it's about that resupply. And usually what happens with resupply is they take the cargo that they need, and they either buy a little spot on a vessel and they pay thousands of dollars to get from the port to the ship or to the oil rig or to the offshore wind farm, and they pay thousands of dollars to do that. The other way they do that is they take a helicopter and they fly the helicopter to land miles off. And that's also expensive and also not very environmentally friendly. It's burning a lot of fuel when it's getting there, and it can also be dangerous because you're putting a pilot in that helicopter, and helicopters are probably one of the most dangerous aircraft in our airspace today. So it's really supplying that kind of filling in that little niche. But I'm seeing this as kind of the start of the use case, right? So you're going shorter distances. You're maybe not flying the full cross-Pacific kind of setup or from port to port. You're flying over a less risky area. There might be there's fewer people. If it falls, it's going to land in the water. It's not going to land on top of somebody. So it's a great way to start testing those BV loss cases, which I think will be important for that middle mile, which I totally agree. I think middle mile is where it's at. I think the use cases are already there. You're taking cargo from one side from an airport. It's already been designed. There's already infrastructure, and you're landing in another place where there's already infrastructure. So you don't have to worry about that infrastructure part where we're talking about that a lot more with that last mile delivery where you're bringing it to people's homes.
Yeah, I would love to hear Randall's thoughts on this.
Yeah, the only thing, well, not the only thing I was thinking, but what came to mind is I remember back in like 2016, I was in Houston actually with some offshore oil rig inspection folks. This is while I was at DJI. And I remember them talking about the huge amount of issue if a drone does go down in the ocean, whether it's environmental people, the insurance that you have to pay for it, you have to retrieve it within like 24 hours or else you get some massive amounts of fines and you have to report it. So even though flying over the ocean, and this is in Singapore, which there's going to be very different laws that constrain them, but flying over the ocean, although seems extremely safe, there is a lot of headache that comes from when you do have a downed aircraft, even though there's unlikely going to be human casualties. It does become a huge pain in the butt. So as experimental, an experimental test bed for middle mile or long duration BB loss flights, there are complications that do make a lot of dollars and cents problems for justifying flying over the ocean. And this was 6 years ago, but still seems like that's something that might come into consideration when doing these sorts of things.
As
Sure.
Randall, as you're talking, I'm thinking, you've got ParaZero out there, right, with the parachutes that deploy if one of these is going down. Where's the company making the floaties, right?
Right.
Like if this thing is going down on water, those are going to deploy and the thing's going to float. It's not going to sink. If you have to retrieve it, there's a beacon on board, easy to get, right? So that's a really interesting concept. I'm going to look around, and maybe I just gave somebody a multi-million or billion-dollar idea. If I did, you're welcome. But as I'm listening to both of you, and of course to Mike, I'm thinking, the Navy and the United States Coast Guard have already been doing this, right? And if you've been tracking what the military's been doing, especially the Navy with their unmanned campaign plan, this idea of human-machine teaming. I mean, the idea that you can have, with very little training, a sailor on board a ship that can deploy a drone, right, ship to ship or shore to ship, as you said, Danielle, middle mile, to deliver that widget or whatever it is, how much money that will save the United States Navy as well. And the other thing I was thinking was, to Randall's point, I'm going to channel Don Bershoff here from True Weather for a second. He's maybe a weather acolyte. You think about the really weird weather conditions over the water, and
more extreme, right?
Yeah, like taking that into account for these operations, I think is going to be really, really critical. So it'll be interesting to watch how this develops. But I'm sure for even like Danielle taking this to the next level of even island hopping, island to island, or mainland to island, like for Hawaii. Man, I'm sure those people on Maui would love to buy a gallon of milk for less than $16, a pop. And if a drone can facilitate that, I'm pretty sure they're going to be welcoming them with open arms.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And just to mention some of the challenges that Randall brought up, absolutely. Retrieval and, if something goes down, that's a major investment because you're going to have to build a more robust aircraft to be able to deal with the weather, but also just the natural air. The sea salt can be very corrosive. And
Absolutely.
so there needs to be a lot of maintenance, a lot of cleaning. So there's still stuff in the works, and there's a lot of safety stuff that, it's still very much in the use case. But if we can figure it out and devise that little floaty and have a retrieval, I think it's a really amazing and inspiring use case, and especially for those island to islands. I mean, that they're so underserved,
For
and
sure.
and this will make a huge difference for their lives, for sure.
Well, it seems like there's at least economic incentives. So even if it's, there's bureaucratic weight that people have to get through, if it makes sense from a monetary standpoint to at least give it a shot to see if we can, optimize costs. If the Navy already has an example of if it's reducing their costs, granted, those are different economics in the Navy, right? The way that things are calculated. But why wouldn't we do this? And then also this would be a great, the data doesn't go bad. It could be used industry wide if it gets to a scale where these companies are interested in showing off their data, right? Because that's always the thing.
Yeah.
Like you could have a company try it, but they'll keep the data proprietary, and then it's no benefit to the whole drone ecosystem. But if enough companies are doing it, then they start to share so they can say, look how much I'm doing it better, right? So
Yeah.
Right.
hopefully we'll
And
we'll
by
be
the
able to get to
way,
that point.
Mike, everybody, first of all, I was remiss. I got in at like 3 in the morning here. I'm a little off my game, so I apologize. We did not really even introduce Randall and Danielle. I feel like they almost don't need an introduction. We've already been talking for 10 minutes. But, if you guys want to do the quick, kind of 30-second, here's who I am, here's what I'm doing right now, because you guys have made some major changes in the last year from kind of where everybody knew maybe originally where you're from and kind of where you are now. So I apologize. That's on me. Danielle, if you want to start, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I started off in the drone industry about 3 years ago, working for Commercial UAV News as their editorial analyst. And I kind of got my feet wet there and got to meet a whole bunch of really brilliant people like Dawn and Randall and Mike. And so I was really thrown into the deep end there. It was a well-known news service, and I had big shoes to fill with Jeremiah Karpowitz kind of being the editorial director there. And so I put my feet to the coal and really did the legwork and started to develop, something that Commercial AV News could be proud of. Volatus Aerospace came along, saw what I was doing, and made me an offer I couldn't refuse, an opportunity to really get into the industry and really report from the industry and draw on industry resources to do exactly what I was doing, but to build something of my own. So I ended up building Drone Network News, which is sponsored by Volatus, but is in no way kind of dictated by them, which is just, kind of an amazing opportunity. I became their chief storyteller. From there, I developed a podcast, Stories from 400 Feet, that really kind of pulls in industry experts as well as the people who are boots on the ground doing these jobs, doing really amazing stuff like battling some really challenging bridges and doing facade inspections and, things that are actually making a difference today. And so I've been really blessed to have a lot of amazing people from NASA. Andy Latcher was on there. So it's been a really fun ride since then.
Well, you're doing amazing work, Danielle. You always have. And, props to Volatus because, they've done a lot of things. Let's just call it philanthropically. Just even on the Dawn of Drones podcast, sponsoring the Above and Beyond series, where they're literally paying for other companies beyond there with like no strings attached. Like, who does that? Like, that would be Volatus. Like, they're the only people I know doing that. And so, and I agree, your podcast, your newscast, great stuff. So thank you for everything you do, Danielle. And Randall, over to you.
I just want to say I moved my microphone. It was behind my laptop, so if I'm coming through
We
louder,
heard it.
okay.
Yeah, you sound good, buddy.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm Randall Warnas. Been in the industry 8 years and 2 days, and it's been one hell of a journey. Most of my time actually a very small amount of time was at DJI. I think that's kind of the misconception. A lot of people, like, I was at DJI at a very important time. Started DJI Enterprise with a few colleagues, but I was only there a year and 3 months at DJI.
Wow.
But it still seems like I was involved with a lot of stuff there. laying the groundwork for what was kind of drones going from a toy to a tool and being more enterprise focused. From there, I went to FLIR. I was at FLIR for a little over four years. And then the last year has been kind of wild, jumping between being the CEO of Autel Robotics and then being the GM of Atlas UAS. And now I'm at Enterprise UAS, kind of on the value added reseller side, which I would say is the most undervalued, underrepresented, and like there's not a lot of credit given to the value added resellers, but they really are the ones putting solutions in new customers' hands and growing the industry. So I like being a part of an organization where I can wear multiple hats and multiple brands and just find the right solutions for people, evangelize the technology across the globe. It's my favorite part of the business, and I will say I am very honored to be here with you three, all legends in your own rights, and yeah, excited to continue the conversation.
So you
Well,
got some
Randall,
of
you also have, I was going to say, your unmanned underground. Tell us just for a second
Yeah,
about that.
so Unmanned Underground was a thing born while I was at FLIR because FLIR was unwilling to allow the drone folks to use social media to like have our own social media interactions. So we created a thing untied to FLIR, which was right at the start of COVID. So we were doing kind of leadership forums at the time, and then that evolved into a kind of a weekly, well, it was weekly, but a weekly. Podcast thing that we do on Twitch. And the idea is I just still want to be connected to the industry, still have interesting conversations, expose some of the really interesting relationships that exist throughout the industry, and not do so tied to any expectation or any brand, and just kind of have free flowing, very informal conversations about the industry. And we've been doing that for a while, and it's a good time. So if anyone does want to come and join, Don's been on there. Mike, I guess you were on you were on the first.
I was on two of them
The
because I was
first
on the one that
unmanned.
Brett did too.
You're right. So
Yeah.
you were the only person that's ever been on two Unmanned Underground
Oh wow.
things.
I'll take that
So
honor.
yeah. So Unmanned Underground is just a thing, a fun place to kind of play and talk about drones, and if anyone wants to be a part of it, just holler.
Yeah, it looks like Danielle, you have you got something you want to share about Michael Hill?
Oh yeah. I before we move on to the next thing, I know we don't have a lot. We each have a lot more to discuss, but I'd be remiss to fail to mention that if you're interested in learning more about offshore platform cargo resupply, Michael Hill is going to be presenting today at 3:45 to 4:15 at Waterway number 5 at the Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit. So go there, check it out, and learn a lot more. I'm sure he's kind of the expert from Volatus who can really fill you in on the particulars on that.
All
I
Yeah,
right.
also want to say something super controversial because we have Mike and Danielle, formerly of Interdrone and Commercial UAV, but Energy Drone Coalition has been one of my favorite shows of the year for the drone space. I will say maybe my favorite because it's so targeted. So if you haven't
Yeah.
been and you're not going this year, go next year because it honestly is like a very professional, very focused, very targeted show in which you'll get a lot of insights, especially to the energy space, oil and gas, and transmission, etc.
And super fun, man. They've got a robot row. They do a thing called Bots and Brews. I mean, where else can you get that? Mike, over to
Right.
you.
All right, Randall. Actually, we're gonna push it over to you. You got some stuff about ParaZero. Um,
Yeah,
so files for
and
IPO. That means they're growing, I would assume.
so this is exactly the topic I wanted to talk about. Is there's this trend, getting investment in the drone industry used to be easier, becoming more difficult because of some failures and also just because of the current climate. Um, so if you look back, we have Ag Eagle going public, I believe is 2016. We had Red Cat Holdings go public in June or May of last year. Then we had Dragonfly shortly after go public, and then there's ParaZero. Now, I know, Mike, you'll know ParaZero. Danielle, you might. Don, I don't know. But
No, ParaZero was like our sponsor of the Donna Jones podcast with Delta Drone International, which at the time was their parent company back in September, like one of our first month sponsors.
Oh, yeah,
So yeah, I
that's a
know
really
them
good
very well.
episode too, actually.
It
Yeah.
was, yeah.
please let me show that there is unbiased and unfiltered information that I would share because ParaZero still is a small company
Yeah.
offering something that's important to a lot of mission cases, so I won't take away from what they're doing. But in this article, it says, ParaZero attained $1 million in revenue in the year of 2021. That's not a lot. And for you to go raise $25 million on the NASDAQ and tell people like, oh, we're a drone company, come and ride this wave and give us $25 million. The reason I brought this article in is it dangerous for people to not have venture capital as accessible for drones? So now there's this public offering that seems like it's pretty low bar to get in, and it can burn the drone industry if they don't do something meaningful with that money.
Well, we'll probably circle back to this theme a little bit later. Market conditions are changing even outside the drone industry. So this is kind of a primary. This is like my hobby horse right now, as a natural purveyor of doom, I suppose. That just have that gut instinct that behavior around tech investment is going to have to change, just because the faucet has been turned off from the Fed. So we have a product that actually, I would assume most people on this call actually think is pretty good, actually does what it's supposed to do. So, but the question I think you're pushing is like, is it this good? Is it worth this much money? And is that overhype going to backfire on the perception of the drone industry in general, or even the perception, not even on a public sphere, but from investment? So, maybe not. It depends. Usually what happens with like companies that aren't like commercially well known, like broadly, is that the stock goes down from here, and the investors may back their money, but as long as it's not like a big blow up that backfires on the whole market, it kind of just hums along at that lower price for eternity after that. If they're able to run their business on top of that, then it was, I guess, a successful play for investors. That's kind of my take.
What do you think, Danielle?
Well, being part of a publicly traded company, I have a little bit of bias. Volatus Aerospace went public in January. And so what I see is there's a couple things, and I'm not sure if this applies to ParaZero, or maybe I can just speak more broadly to the idea of what it means to actually go public. Once you go public, there's a lot of governance. You have a lot of transparency, and you're beholden to the stakeholders and as well as other things. So what that's doing for the industry, or could potentially do for the industry, as long as we continue to build rapport and we don't fall back on that, is that we're going to start actually showing that we have good governance, and that can be a really important part of us in the industry, kind of moving towards maturity. And I think, and Mike, we're going to be talking about this with your article moving forward when we talk about some of those other scenarios that we're dealing with. We're dealing with a very volatile market, and that can cause some questionable things. But at the end of the day, I think we can't stay in startup world forever. We have to start thinking about long term, because no company is going to stay as a startup. They have to actually think about next steps, and living off of venture capital is just a challenge. So I think that in and of itself, I think is a sign of maturity for the industry, that we're starting to think about moving towards a more publicly traded scenario where we're showing good governance and we're able to raise capital and continue to move forward as a business. But I think in terms of the business strategy, I think every single business is going to have to make that decision on what they need to do, what's the best point to go forward. And I am not economist at all. I don't do too much. I don't know a lot. So that's just from my 1,000-mile viewpoint, high level.
I think that's a great point. And, they say niches make riches. And I don't know how many other people are out there making a similar product to ParaZero? Like, if they're out there, I haven't heard of them, honestly.
Mhm.
And I don't know about all of you, but we're I mean, we're pretty deep into the industry, and I'm like, who else is doing this? And then I think, what else is running in the background here? Because, advanced air mobility, electric vertical takeoff, landing, we just talked middle mile. Some of these larger aircraft are going to need similar systems, bigger systems, and I know ParaZero makes those. So, it makes me wonder, what else is going on in the background that they know they have brewing, maybe some, orders, in the works or new products. I don't know, but like Danielle said, my guess is I like your comments, Danielle, about this kind of a potential sign of maturity in the industry. Look at Volatus, look at Dragonfly. I mean, y'all are doing pretty well since going public. And I just saw we talked last week, I think, right, Mike, about Dragonfly's lidar that they just put out.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Jeremiah brought that up.
yeah, Jeremiah brought that, and so like you see these companies evolving too, which I think is awesome. So I guess it remains to be seen, but it's a great piece, Randall, to bring up, and the fact that ParaZero did do the IPO, because I forget you were running around AUVSI, Randall.
Yeah.
Somebody was saying I heard people talking about ParaZero, but I don't know that it was in the context of this IPO. Like what I was hearing was like, what's going on with ParaZero? and,
Mhm.
and then we see this, and I'm like, well, that's what's going on with them. So maybe they're right.
Well,
I
they've
don't know.
certainly been good in fostering private relationships with important players in aerospace. So if there is kind of a larger move to a bigger market besides UAVs, or at least some concept of what their next big move is, then this is like a logical step for them, right?
Yeah.
The fear, though, is if you're going to try to take it from both angles, is that they don't see a next step, and that the only step is IPO to try and claim as much money for the investors. Because it's a huge proposition for a business to go under that level of scrutiny. And there's usually, those are the two big reasons. Well, we just need to pay our investors, so if we get scrutinized to death and die from here, at least we made the money back for them. Or we actually see a larger play that if we don't take this evolution, then we're going to be stuck in startup land forever. And
Yeah.
yeah.
I would say that Danielle, you brought up the amount of governance, and I think that also results in a difficulty to pivot quickly. And what we found over the last my 8 years in the industry is everyone pivots, and they pivot fast. And if you ask Adam Bree from Skydio if he would want to go IPO, maybe, but maybe not right now, because they need a certain level of autonomy and a certain level of speed. The pace of the industry, especially with DJI, like put it basically having the gas pedal and the key to the ignition, like they dictate the pace. And if we start getting into a place in which you need to go to shareholders and you need to kind of be overly transparent about these pivots and show the numbers of why you're pivoting and have everyone kind of nod their head and understand it, or if they don't understand it, they bail. It could just be an uncomfortable situation at some point without that flexibility. But ParaZero, with their niche and their product being pretty well defined, maybe they are a perfect candidate for IPO. But what I see is just this trend, and not a lot of people really analyzing what that means for the industry. So I thought I'd bring it up here.
Yeah,
That's
good
awesome.
point. No surprises with technology like ParaZero has, right? It's
Right.
whereas drones are still rapidly evolving.
Right.
So yeah, we're going to take a quick break just to thank one of our sponsors of today's shows. So we have two sponsors today, ISR Ideas. Thank you, General James Poss, for showing up on the Leadership Podcast last week. But we also have the Drone Code Foundation, which has the PX4 Developer Summit coming up in Austin, Texas this week, June 23rd and 24th. I'm going to be there. Don's going to be there, actually. So if you've never heard of the PX4 Developer Summit, basically this is like the best place to get alpha on pre-market stuff, in terms of what are the developers actually working on? What's the base level code that a lot of these drones that operate on open source are using? What are the cool new features you could kind of expect? Just kind of getting a cool idea of, what the builders are actually focusing on. This will be my third time in attendance, I believe. First time was in Zurich when they launched. And I'll tell you, the connections that I made at that show, I still have today. So I'm really excited to be joining Drone Code in the PX4 ecosystem coming up this week, June 23rd and 24th. I know we're going to see Dawn there because she's driving down from EDRC just to see the drone light show that's being put together by Uvify. So,
well, and not just for the drone light show. There's a really big party at the Capitol Factory where they rented out 2 floors on Friday night. So, I'm here for the drone light show and the parties. But no, I'm also here for the connections. I can't wait to meet Ramon in person and get to see Mike again, and however many other people. And Maggie Schuster, my partner in crime from my Drone Law Connections Clubhouse, will be with me. She's here with me now, and really excited to spend some time in Austin. So looking forward to that. And fun fact, everybody, Ramon is actually, you'll see at the end of this podcast, he's going to be on our Full Tilt Tech Industry Leadership Talks next Tuesday. So check that out. But in the meantime, Mike, did we want to go maybe pivot to your article, since we were talking about kind of the industry and the status of the industry? And there we go.
Yeah, so tech layoffs in June, more than 7,000 losing their jobs. One of the ones they bring up is Coinbase, which dropped 18% of its staff. And actually, they were in the middle of hiring a bunch of people and gave them, the stop sign and said, actually, we didn't mean that. We rescind our offer.
Yikes.
So this is just kind of, if you just look back at the history of the Fed rate, it was at 0% for almost a decade. And the people who are actually investing in these startups, they're basically able to take out big loans at 0% interest. So why not invest in a whole bunch of different startups? And you kind of saw this evolution over time where, we're all like secretly talking to each other, like, how is that startup going to make it? That seems like the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And the truth was, it was never going to make it, and it was the dumbest idea you ever heard. But there was just so much money to deploy that these venture capitalists had to deploy it. Because where else were they going to put it, right? Where you could possibly, if you hit 1 out of 15 with a Facebook or even a Snapchat, you're paying back in dividends. So I just see this as a big transition into the way that tech investment's going to happen. Which companies we actually value. I think you're going to see a shift towards real, actual businesses, also known as rabbits, where you have to prove your business case first before the investment comes. And I'm just curious, knowing that things have changed, what everybody here kind of thinks about it and how that might affect the industries that you cover and participate in.
Well, I will say a point just to jump in. First, I would say that it's mind-blowing that we were able to get through some odd years of COVID, not knowing what was going on, building the infrastructure of work from home, and somehow this was not what we were seeing. We were not seeing massive layoffs like this. And then now it seems like the economy is kind of strange, and this isn't an economy podcast, but it's it's just we're in a weird place. But a lot of this stuff is tech, it's like software or the stuff that's listed on the article, and not hardware. And I think that what we proved for the drone industry through COVID is that there's a lot of staying power with the necessity for this technology, no matter how bad things get or how much feces hits the fan, that there is needs for robots to do jobs, and we're not paying those robots. So there's needs for those robots. That means there's needs for the people building those robots and putting their brains behind the robots. And so that gives me some comfort as we go into this weird, uncertain time where, my wife works for a pretty sizable tech company, and they put a hiring freeze on for, you know, all open positions. And that was like a week ago, and I was like, oh, is something happening? And then it just seems like there's one after another making these same announcements. And Mike, I think you you put this article on here, and it's from today. So this is like something breaking news almost, that these tech companies are making these things happen. And I think that others will see this and follow suit, thinking it's okay. But I think that the drone industry has proven that it can weather these kind of storms.
What do you think, Danielle?
Well, I definitely agree with that. I mean, it's been proven with everything that Randall just said. And on top of that, I mean, in terms of jobs creation, I mean, I know we talk about robots kind of taking over jobs, but really, when you bring a robot in, you're actually creating several more jobs. You know, you're making the job, you have somebody overseeing that job, you're having someone take care of the robot, and taking care of the data that it's collecting. So it creates more jobs around that. And I haven't seen any of that let up. People are still looking for people in this industry. It still has that forward momentum. Now, where the funds are going to be coming from, that could become a different conversation. As venture capitalists, I think actually this puts a challenge on our industry to start building the business case, which I actually find a little bit refreshing in a way, because
Definitely.
because I think that's where we will have to be able to stand up and demonstrate the value. And there's value there. There's real value there, as Randall was pointing out, as we make our livings off of pointing to the value of where all this technology can go. So in terms of that, I think that's also a really important thing to keep in mind, is that this is kind of putting us in a position where we actually have to make that business case, and we can prove ourselves as not just, you know, we're not the Bitcoin of the tech industry. We're legit.
Yeah, you know, we always talk about this idea of people creating solutions, you know, in search of a problem. And really that's a bass backwards way to run a business. You always need that value proposition first. And, you know, to Mike's point about people just kind of throwing money when it was out there early on even bad ideas, which, well, that's just a bad idea. You know, this really makes me think about also our very first crew. We had Mary McNabb and from Drone Life, right, and Romeo Dersher from Auterion. And Miriam brought up an article about these robot baristas, and again in Singapore, Danielle, because they are so forward-leaning when you talk about autonomous vehicles, robots, and kind of what they're using things for. You know, and we talked about this idea of, will they replace the humans? And I agree with you 100%, Danielle. You know, what I worry about is that workforce of tomorrow, like all these other, you know, as people are getting laid off, whatever positions they're in right now, you're right, there are other positions out there, but is the training, is the education available for these people to, you know, for this pivot that we are going to need to see? And, you know, and that gets, you know, into our education system, and that's a whole nother podcast. And you know, but, you know, that I think that's concerning too. And so it is awful to hear people getting laid off, because as you look around, again, to Randall's earlier comment, you know, this is not an economy podcast, but no joke, I'm thinking milk probably is $16 a gallon in Maui, because it was like $7 when I went there 5 years ago. And if you haven't gone to the grocery store lately, it's like, what is going on right now? And so for people to lose their positions in this time, you know, in the tech industry, I mean, there's going to be some real impacts to people. And then where are those programs, the training opportunities, that education to pick these folks back up and give them opportunities, including in industries that are doing, I would say, pretty great and have the potential to keep soaring, like the drone industry or advanced air mobility. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the big question for me is which jobs actually got cut, right?
Yeah,
So,
that was a great question.
You know, is it engineers? It depends on the evolution of the company, right? So I would assume at Coinbase it wasn't engineers, that it was a lot of kind of top level markety type people, people that would, you know, take positions like mine. We're sadly more disposable when the market has to shift towards now rather than later, because that's really what's happening, right? It's the time frame, the projection, right? You can deploy money for a startup that the returns are going to be 3 years, 5 years down the road, if that there's no interest rate on that. If there's an interest rate on that, you want those returns to be sooner, and therefore you want to know what the business is doing now. And that's probably what a shift, this first kind of culling is people that are based on future stuff that aren't actually contributing to the product or the business. They're gonna be wiped away, and they're gonna start. I think you'll see rehiring at some point. To your point, to your kind of overall question about which jobs are getting automated out, I think there is that is a larger concern for the economy. If you're looking at jobs that drones are doing, they're actually, you're right, not replacing humans in most cases. But if I look at Tesla's or it's actually not just Tesla, but there's other automotive companies that are going for self-driving trucks, that's a different story. And yeah, I think that's the one, that specific industry is the one we have to be cautious about automating out, because that's a large chunk of the population that suddenly won't have a job, and they tend to be, more active when they're pushed out than other constituents. So it's going to be an interesting time ahead. I in terms of tech, I'm still actually excited by this on some level, because it was getting a little ludicrous, the kind of dumb things we were throwing money at, and a lot of real projects, because this was kind of like the philosophy is like, no, if you're not doing something like WeWork, proposing that you're going to buy all important real estate all over the world to set the price of real estate. That's how crazy those people had gotten. Like, we also ignored real businesses that were just trying to do shared office space in that sector. We ignored real businesses that were building drones for specific use cases because, well, are you taking over the whole market? So I think you'll see more targeted investment, and I think we'll actually see some cooler, more reasonable tech because of that.
Can I say something on this before we?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sure.
So I also think for the drone industry that we should be excited that there are talented people that have experience in tech working for, fast-paced companies that are moving, that they can come to the drone industry. The saddest thing is when somebody with a lot of meaning for our industry leaves our industry. It's so unfortunate, because then we're starting over with people that don't understand the nuances, that come in and think it's just another thing, it's just another piece of technology. For those in it, we realize how small it is. For as much as it's covered on the news, we realize that you bump into the same faces. We know that the revenue numbers are not, we're not hockey sticking anytime soon, that it's now a slower climb, and that we need talented people to get us there, and talented people that have went through a couple bumps over, their first few years and understand the landscape. If we keep resetting, and engineers are probably the most pertinent, where these guys go to Google or go to Amazon or go to some big tech companies when they leave drones, it's really unfortunate. And so if we could take opportunities like this to say, drones are staying, this is a meaningful technology that does save lives, saves livelihoods, does put, efficiency and this idea of the future really in perspective. Join something like this industry, somewhere exciting and somewhere that you can feel some stability and really make a mark, and you could be the next person on the Full Crew podcast or in a year from now, probably, because they might not have much to say today, but to have that vision of being able to really put your fingerprints on something, drones is wide open for that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mike, when you sent that article, I don't know what I was clicking on, but I found a related one on the flip side of this, and kind of related to drones, and said, hey, here's some companies that you may want to start thinking investing in the drone industry, kind of where we started with the IPO with ParaZero, and then Mike's comment on the tech industry, and Danielle, like, hey, drone jobs here, available here. So not surprisingly, some of these are military companies like Boeing, Lockheed, Northrop Grumman, of course. But then you do have Randall Google, right? They're saying, you know, because and Amazon, and you know, these folks are getting into the drone space, and they're putting some money in there. And then you've got folks like Nvidia, right? So you know, the guts, the software, all of these things are going to be so key. And this article from U.S. News, their money section said, hey, here's like 7 you should seriously check out. So you know, I think it's always a mixed bag. It's sad to hear folks getting let go, but there are so many opportunities still out there to be kind of positive about it. Go ahead, Danielle.
And something that I'm always being reminded of and having conversations internally is that we talk about drone industry as a homogenous group, and it
Yeah.
really isn't.
No.
It's more of an ecosystem of people who utilize drones.
Yes.
And that makes us also puts us in a good place to be more resilient than just say one particular service or software company that's servicing one group.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
it's not
absolutely.
just the users, right? Like you said, it's like all the pieces and parts too. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I'm in agreement with that because it was something that I said when I was trying to piece together Interdrone and like why does a show like EDRC have staying power? It's because it was specifically focused on an industry, and that's what happened, right? So, and that's actually usually common with tech where there's a broad use, small, or lightly developed technology that everybody says, well, maybe we could plug it in here, maybe we could plug it in there. Then it becomes more distributed into certain sectors, but it's still a support technology. And then like the third evolution is where it just becomes so ubiquitous that it is its own industry. We're not there yet. We tried to leapfrog that with this industry in both narrative and technology, and it didn't work, right? And that's you know, you brought up Bitcoin before. That's the issue with crypto. It's just even further behind than the drone industry. It oversold its narrative versus its utility.
Yep.
Dawn, you've got kind of a happier article. Let's raise the spirits a little bit.
I do. And, you know, it's so funny because, you know, everybody out there, just so you know, we collaborate offline really close to this podcast, and everybody kind of drops their articles in. And after we do, it's so weird to see the synergies, like, because these are all things we came up with
It's totally
separately,
unplanned. It just happens.
it's totally unplanned. And, you know, honestly, Randall, you were talking about ParaZero, you know, the parachutes. And I was like, oh, little floaties. Well, here's a company that kind of is doing it now that I think about it. So Switzerland's Imperial College actually developed this dual robot drone is what they're calling it. You see the little floaties there. It flies through the air. It lands on the water and to collect water samples, right? So they're calling it, I love this, you know, acronym, Medusa, which is the multi-environment dual robot for underwater sample acquisition. You know, having spent my lifetime almost in the military, you know, acronyms are something near and dear to my heart. And Medusa, that is so cool. They've tested it in labs and in the field. And how it works is basically it'll fly to hard to reach aquatic environments before it lands on the water. It deploys this tethered underwater pod that's attached to a camera with a bunch of sensors on it. And it can go up to 10 meters, which is pretty significant. And what they're using it for, you know, kind of Mike, to your earlier comment about use cases, they're measuring water in lakes for signs of microorganisms, algae blooms that can pose hazards to human health and to the environment and ecosystem there. And in future, they're looking to see if they can monitor climate cues like temperature changes in the Arctic seas, and also maybe offshore infrastructure. Again, we're at Energy Drone Robotics Coalition Summit right now, like underwater energy pipes and floating wind turbines. So what's really cool is that these folks have this thing next up, the Proteus drone, that is going to be a shapeshifter. That's what they're looking to do. They're going after grant money, and basically that is based on the Greek shape-shifting sea god. They did not
Greek
have a
theme.
picture of this vehicle that they have in their mind of shape-shifting for underwater, but we've got the Medusa, and there she is. So what do y'all think about this? Let's go with Randall.
Good. So back when I was at DJI, I remember, I believe it was Noah, but it was someone, and they were in Danielle's neck of the woods. They were in Maine, and they were looking for someone that was a missing hiker, and they wanted to put some sort of device that was shaped kind of like a tennis ball and run it through a river to see if there it was like sonar or something. I don't know the technology, but they were looking to see if they could reach the bottom of this river with it and see if they could find this body. And at the time, it was like, well, we have an airframe for that, but the rest of it you're just going to have to figure out. And it's nice to see that concept, new concepts, especially by universities where they're taking drone technology and they're building on it solutions. Now, a lot of the drone companies that exist today started as PhD projects or master's theses or something like that's where a lot of them come from, and so I don't want to diminish that. But the scariest thing about the drone industry is we have companies like DJI, which make a very beautiful, very polished, very finished product, and even other drone manufacturers trying to scratch the same itch that exists for consumers still are like, well, that's not what a DJI product looks like. It doesn't look as finished. It doesn't, the user experience isn't as great. So when you have products like this, you see it and you're like, that could be a workhorse. That could be something that literally changes the world. But when you see the platform and you see kind of the unfinishedness of it, can you sell something that has that lack of, eye appeal to a very finicky, very fickle drone buyer market, which we are all familiar with? They are used to one thing. It's hard to get people into drones for their first time on a product like this, where it could cost a lot of money and have a lot of expertise needed behind it. Um, so the intro drug drones, which we're really used to, have their challenges getting into new users as well. And if you're trying to appeal to existing drone people, it has to be very refined, and that's a challenge. Those are my thoughts.
What do you
So
think,
did you
Danielle?
just
Wait.
did you? I was gonna. I want to. Randall, did you just introduce the concept of gateway drones, like gateway drugs?
That was the purpose. I don't think that I
I
introduced
love
it, but if you want to give me credit for it, shit, I'll take it.
Gateway drones. Go ahead, Danielle. I'm sorry.
I started talking a little bit about that when we had a little tello sitting there. I'm like, this is kind of your starter drone. But yeah, gateway drone is really what those are. You put them in the classroom, you start. That's a side start.
Yeah, like drone soccer and things like
Yeah,
that get people
absolutely,
going.
absolutely.
But
I
yeah,
think the
go on.
sorry. So I think the user interface that Randall's talking about is really an important thing, and we should be thinking about it not only in this way, but also in terms of when we deploy it in public safety, how people are going to respond to drones and what they look like, and how we're going to integrate this into society. That what that user feels about that drone is going to be a major part, and something very worth talking about. Um, Sideways, my inner drone was smiling a little bit because I just love this use case, um, and what it could potentially do. I got to talk to uh, the University of Iowa geology department, who's finally using drones for the first time. Um, and just hearing their excitement and not knowing what drones could do, I can imagine bringing something on in that academic research space is a completely different kind of conversation. But the thing is like cost, as Randall brought up, like how are they going to be able to afford to utilize even this kind of technology to do the kind of things that we're looking to do, and where's the funding and all that stuff. So I think there's a lot of roads ahead, but so cool. And I think there's a pressure for it. I think, our ecology, and especially our ocean ecology, is really a concern right now. And if there are governments who are willing to put the funding in and willing to invest in this technology to see where it can go, I think there's a lot going on. Also, I love the fact that they're integrating with different drone technologies. We've been seeing this mostly with the ground in air robotics, and it's great to see it with the maritime and air robotics.
Yeah, I'm enjoying watching your inner drone nerd kind of bloom here on the podcast. one of the things that I find interesting about any like ivory tower kind of experiments like this is there's a lot of ways it could go, right? One, it could just be an inspiration for current industry players already. Two, the team that worked on this can be basically using this as their portfolio piece when they do interviews, and they're guaranteed to get the job. Um, and I actually know a lot. Talking about the PX4 Developer Summit, I met a lot of those people that were actually there at Zurich doing these projects for wayfinding, and they went on to work at Unique, and they went on to work at DJI, and they went on to work at Skydio. So this is really the genesis of that. And what's interesting about this one is that it's a lot more solid than the use cases you might have seen coming out of colleges a couple years ago, where they kind of felt like science fair projects. So if more of this, less of that, that's a positive direction. We've got a few comments in the chat that we didn't address. One got lost. Sorry, it didn't show up here on my dashboard. But Volatus Aerospace, Texas. So we got Danielle's team saying good morning from EDRC, and we've got Chris Wedgeworth, longtime fan of Dawn of Drones, now fan of Full Crew, saying he's a DJI-aholic here. So that user interface does seem to matter. Gives people the good feels. So the other path that I want to bring up. By the way, anybody in the chat, if you want to get your questions in, we're coming up on the hour, so we're going to be kicking out soon. But the last thing I want to address is basically you might see this technology actually just be absorbed by a big company. Like they get the idea and they say, hey, we could add that sensor, or we could figure out a way to make that a little bit more sleek and add it to our drones in the next 6 months, if there's a market, right? So.
Yeah. Well, and I think there is, Mike, because, Jess Chovid, who was a Woman to Watch, Women in Drones, Women to Watch award recipient.
She's from my neck of the woods, right?
Yeah, she's got that Rainmaker company. They put out the Nixie, and they've been doing environmental sampling in New York and doing very well. I mean, when you talk about compliance and, these environmental concerns, it is a niche. And I'm not aware that her drones land on the water. They definitely fly over. They drop their product in to take the samples, but I could imagine a combination here, and it's all about integration, right? So at the end of the day, I think it was Danielle, you said earlier about this ecosystem and, how all of these things are kind of coming together. I think that's what's really exciting as we watch not only the drone industry is not an island, right? It's technology, and all of those pieces and parts that get incorporated into it to make really cool and relevant and lucrative in the end market use cases. So. All right, we're like 2 minutes out, Mike. I don't know if you want to do any final thing here.
We're closing out, so I want to thank our guests. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Randall. We got a lot coming up this week. We got Ramon on the Full Tilt coming up tomorrow. Who do you have on Wednesday, Dawn of Drones?
Dawn of Drones on Wednesday. See, Mike, you would ask me that. We have tiles at the end here. I'm sorry, my brain is still at 3 o'clock in the morning right now. Let's see. I know it's somebody good, and I'm
Mission Go. Who's from Mission Go?
Yeah. Oh, no. That's next week. Mission Go, and Bronwyn Morgan is next week with Chris Cognati from Mission Go. I know we've got Julie Avtrain on Clubhouse.
On Drone Law Connections on Thursday. And yeah, next week is Bronwyn and Chris. And
who's Wednesday on Dawn of Drones, Mike?
I don't know. We'll see in the card, I guess.
Okay, so. I'm sorry, whoever you are. I feel awful, but my brain is fried, and we've got a lot going on, including the fact that I got to go set up my booth here, and I'll give a big hey to Volatus down there on the floor. I'm looking forward to Mike's talk later today, too. So, everybody, thank you so much, and don't forget to subscribe to Full Crew and get notifications when we're out there. And we don't have a tile for this, but next week on the Unmanned Underground, we're going to do a little compilation of the best of the crew from the month, like a roll-up. So check that out next Tuesday. How can they find you, Randall?
So twitch.tv/Unmanned Underground. That's the place to go. And we'll try to promote that as much as possible over the next week.
Awesome. All right. Out here.